watching online, welcome. Man, we're having some good times with some of our awkward conversations. Just greeting the live crowd made me think that we've done some really fun things lately. So,
is this awkward?
You should go check them out. It's not gonna be awkward tonight, but it might be awkward, David.
Because you reminded you.
Oh. Well, welcome, everyone. Really glad you're here. What all did I say? No, seriously, sorry I was muted. Welcome to those of you online. You all can hear me. Oh, man. No, I'm really glad you're here. It's good to be here together, and I'm excited tonight. Sandra will be sharing, and so let's join into some worship time, and we'll see what God has for us tonight. But I just have expectation that he has good things for us because he always does, right? So, Sandra, Jeremy?
So tonight I wanted to focus on, some of our worship songs are more about encouraging ourselves and like recognizing who we are, and as children of God, recognizing that. And I love that. And I love doing that kind of confession songs about who we are and how God sees us. But tonight I wanted to do really like love songs to him. I wanted to just give him praise. So we're going to it's a little bit of a shortened version tonight, but we're going to just worship him, talk about him in our singing tonight. So please stand and let's begin.
Tested like a covenant of old.
Father, we worship you. I'm so glad that we get to praise you every day, all the time. That it is okay for us to worship you. That it's more than okay that you love to hear our praises. And so tonight, Father, we just say you are worthy and we are thankful. So grateful for all that you have done, for all that you are. Thank you for being so good to us. You are a good, good Father. Let's just start with those first two lines of the verse. A few more times. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the Lamb. Worthy is the Lamb.
You know, I was just thinking of those last words there. Forgiven all sin and shame and gave us amazing grace. That's just incredible, you know, to think about that no matter what's happening in life, no matter where things are at, the ups, the downs, the ins, the outs, the busyness, the slowness, whatever it might be, his amazing grace is always the same. Always. And it's always ours, right? Incredible. Man, thank you guys. You guys can be seated if you like. Sorry, Jeremy. Oh. Yeah, thank you. I'm pretty electrical. Yeah, go ahead and leave those on. But it is so weird.
Like an eel?
Did you notice I flipped that switch and nothing happened? No, I know electrical pretty well, but I can't figure this one out. I won't dialogue here on it for long, but it's a 3-way switch, so you should be able to turn it on or off there or there. But half the time you can't, that and won't do anything. And I've changed the switches even. So, no, I'm not going to say that. I was going to make fun of some churches, but I won't make it. I won't make fun of churches tonight. Listen, let's do a few announcements, and then David's going to come up and join me. Hans is up there thinking, go ahead and make fun of him. Do it. Kenzie, could you throw a slide up for me? OFC Hike, that is this Sunday. So if you're going to join us, we're going to meet at the trailhead at 8 a.m. We're going to do Cross Sear, that's how I say it anyway, Mountain Trail. There's 3 trailheads. We're going to do the one that's actually in Glen Haven. So if you need more details than that, just let us know, and we'll get you some specifics. So 8 a.m. at the trailhead this Sunday. We also have August 23rd. That is a Friday night. So many of you would normally be coming anyway. We're just going to do things a little different that night, in that it's going to be, we're calling it a hangout. So we're still going to have some service. We're going to still stream live, and so we'll still bring the word. We'll still do some fun, encouraging, good, churchy kind of things, but also bring snacks, bring fun things to eat, and we'll just have more extended fellowship time and hanging out and less actual service-y kind of things. So that'll be Friday night, August 23rd. What else, Kenzie? Is there anything else other than giving? All right, David, you want to come on up? I'm going to make it easy on David here because I actually only asked him to do this a couple of hours ago. So I figured if we sat, it'd be a little more comfortable. And I also put you in the chair that's a little higher. You're a little taller anyway, so we're just going to have a little bit of a conversation here about giving. And David has had no prep for this, so
I have no idea what we're doing.
So you're winging it. I'm a little bit winging it too.
That's actually better.
It kind of is.
Yeah.
And so let me know if this isn't picking us both up well, and we'll hand it back and forth. Otherwise, I'm going to kind of hold it between us.
Okay.
You and I have a tendency to have what I think are nothing short of brilliant conversations.
Since we're the only ones there, of course
nobody can refute it. How many times have you and I said, "Man, the camera, or at least the audio recording, should have been going during this conversation"? Right?
It wouldn't have ever happened if the audio recording had been there. But
that's the thing.
okay.
So I don't know if we can recreate it
Right.
here.
Okay.
But I had made the comment a couple of weeks ago that I should do more teaching on giving, because I think it's a little awkward maybe when you're a recipient often of gifts. It's a little more awkward to talk about giving. But here's the thing. It's a biblical, godly principle, right? So,
I believe so.
So what do you think, when you think of giving, what are some of the things, we're just winging it here. So what are some of the things that come to you immediately when you think of giving? Why is it important, or what's the foundation of it, or what?
I want to do it.
Oh, wow. Okay.
That's the first thing that comes to mind.
Okay.
Right? It is absolutely zero fun to do if I don't want to do it.
Yeah, that's so good, David.
Right.
Yeah.
I live in a world, I think, where we do a lot of charity work.
Sure. You mean professionally?
Professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. And
Yeah.
it's not near as fun.
Okay.
It doesn't feel like it's genuine and from the heart,
Sure,
right?
sure.
So when you say, what do I think of first? I think of, I enjoy it when I want to do it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, and I mean, come on, that's the biblical foundation that we always come back to here at Open Fields, is that under the new covenant, that is the concept, right? Give as you purpose, as you desire, as you want, as you have find the joy and the fun in it, right? Okay, so one of the things that I'm going to brag on David here for just a minute, because I mean, some of you, maybe you know him, maybe there's people watching that don't know David at all, but David's not only been a good friend for many, many, many years. Wow, I mean, we're getting old.
It's been a minute, dude.
So lots of years, but he's also been a very big help in the ministry. And I don't know, I'd have to go back and research how long you've been on In Motion Ministries board. And In Motion Ministries is the nonprofit that Open Fields operates under, if that didn't make sense to you. But he sat on that board for a long time as the treasurer, almost all of that time, I believe. I think so. He's been a faithful servant. And so when I think about giving, that's even a way that you give. And my point is, I've observed David and his life, and he is a giver. You give of your time and you give of your money. You so you must find joy in that.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, per your comment, that's why you do it, right?
Yeah,
not out
that's
of
right.
compulsion. And
well, listen, sometimes we do end up giving the less fun way, right? I would be lying if I didn't say there's sometimes that we just feel.
What drives that sometimes? What happens when that occurs, that you give the less fun way?
Duty? I don't know if that's the right way to.
And is that something that's put upon you, or what? I mean, like, or are there times you're like, man, I should give to this. I don't really want to.
But it's like I really just feel like I better. Right.
Okay. All right. Yeah. And that's fair.
Yeah.
And because I think we're navigating a lot internally when we give. Right. I definitely could agree with that statement, that there's times that I give that I enjoy it more than others.
Right.
I don't like. I've given a few times where I did it purely out of guilt, or even fear, because of maybe the environment that had been set. I don't like that at all.
You think we've done that? Probably. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's easy to get into those environments, or it not. Maybe it's a social environment, a church environment, a community sense of fear and manipulation and control, but I think it also can happen internally for us. Right? I mean, ourselves.
Right.
And then we end up giving. So
I remember giving. I don't know if this is where we're going or not.
We don't know where we're going. So
I remember going. This is Heather and I hadn't been married very long, and we just didn't have any money. And I remember having $1. Yeah. And I remember thinking I was going to give it in the offering that night, and it was a church event.
Yeah.
But I didn't. I remember thinking I'm literally just following some of that teaching that says you give to get.
Yeah.
And that's literally
so
right.
Yeah.
That was. I remember going to a service one time with thinking, I'm just going to do it because we need the money. So there's been some crazy teaching.
There has been. Yeah. There has been crazy teaching over the years. Have you grown a little past some of that?
Right. It's been a while since we've done that.
I mean, I'd like to think that we're doing a better job sticking to what the Word of God actually says. But, there is some weirdness out there. It's probably still out there. I don't know. I don't bump into it much anymore, but I'm sure there's some weird teaching out there anymore. But hey, listen, if you're watching or you're in this room, I just wanted you to hear David and I just dialogue a little on this. No plan, no planning, no preparation.
No prep at all.
I think, to me, the likeness of this conversation is how giving should be. You give because you just want to. And let it be a joy, and let it just be, something that is a pleasure.
Which probably means, if I can say something,
please.
Which probably means that if our heart never wants to give,
good point.
It probably means that there needs to be some level of heart work growth in that area, to where at least I want to give. I think that's when we.
That's a good point.
I think that's when we go to God and just say,
yeah.
I know you want me to want to give, but I never want to give.
Yeah.
Or I'm not feeling any areas where I want to give.
Sure.
And so I'm willing.
Yeah.
Right? Just make your heart willing at that point. And that way, hopefully, the desire then comes out.
That makes me think of Genesis. And we see it many, many places, but we see it right there in Genesis that God loved mankind. And it's the whole reason he created this world, because he wanted somebody to lavish his love on.
Right.
You know, we also see it at the cross, that God so loved us. So we see it in John 3:16, right? That he sent Jesus because he loved us. So that compulsion of giving is just him.
Right.
He just wants to give.
Right.
It's like he has to. So you're right. If we're not experiencing that, that might be a point of growth. And I still might do some teaching on this.
Okay.
But
There's probably more points to cover than what we covered here.
one or two maybe. But
Okay.
this was stinking brilliant. So even if we do say so ourselves. But thank you for giving to Open Fields. We appreciate it. Man, it's nice to be able to be doing this. And we're coming up on 2 years, believe it or not. And Sandra and I are both finding a lot of joy in it. And I hope that many of you are finding value and benefit in it as well. And here we are, and here we keep going, and trust that it'll get better and better. And we've got some fun stuff down the road with worship improving, and it's happening, hon, right? She's looking at me like, but no, we do have some fun things that we're working on that will just enhance that experience of worship, and a lot of things that I'm thinking about that I want to teach on over this next year. And so thank you all for giving, that this might continue and that the gospel might be proclaimed. And, you know, all of you on YouTube, we're at 140 subscribers, so it keeps going up. So,
Huge.
You know, you're only looking at this number, but all of them are watching right now. There's 140 of them right there right now.
There's only 200 people here.
Yeah, but there's 140 right
So,
there.
yeah.
So, they're not all, evangelistically speaking, they're all watching right now. So. All right. Well, thank you,
Thanks.
David.
You bet. Sure.
Yeah. So with that, Sandra, I'm gonna move these chairs for you so that you don't have to stumble around them, but come and be a blessing. You always are. Thank you.
Okay. So we are full on back at it. We're going into Bible stories. So tonight we are going to talk about little baby Moses. I'm excited about this. What?
Andawan's not here.
I know. I was going to use little Andawan as an example of baby Moses, but she's too pale and too blonde haired to be Jewish.
Yeah, I was gonna say, we're gonna put her in a basket.
Yeah, I was going to put her in a little basket, have a kiddie pool, and swirl her around. So, tonight I am excited about talking about Moses as a baby and the things that went on in his, not in the birth, but in his young life growing up. So, I want to start out by reading Exodus 1, 7 through 22. Now listen, here's the deal. As we read this tonight, I want you to be paying attention, because we're going to have a minute after we read it that I want to hear from you. Like, what stands out to you? What makes you go, huh, that's interesting. I want to hear those things, okay? So as we're reading, pay attention to what's popping out at you. Okay, so let us begin. Exodus 1, verse 7 starts with but. I'm sorry to start with the word but, because that's kind of in the middle of a thought, but that's where we're starting. But the people of Israel were fruitful and increased greatly. They multiplied and grew exceedingly strong, so that the land was filled with them. Now there arose a new king over Egypt, who did not know Joseph, and he said to his people, behold, the people of Israel are too many and too mighty for us. Come, let us deal shrewdly with them, lest they multiply, and if war breaks out, they join our enemies and fight against us and escape from the land. Therefore they set taskmasters over them to afflict them with heavy burdens. They built for Pharaoh store cities, Pithom and Ramses, but the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied, and the more they spread abroad. And the Egyptians, those are Egyptians. It's the current shortened version. Yeah, that's the short ones. The Egyptians were in dread of the people of Israel. So they ruthlessly made the people of Israel work as slaves and made their lives bitter with hard service in mortar and brick and in all kinds of work in the field. In all their work, they ruthlessly made them work as slaves. Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. I just want you to reread that last verse. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live. Okay. So, let's just start out with your thoughts. What things stood out to you as we read that?
What is a birth stool?
Okay. Okay.
Second that motion. Never heard that before. Never seen that somehow. What version were you reading from?
That is English Standard. Yep. Okay. What's a birth stool? Anything else?
I want to know how long this went on. Like when, maybe before verse 17, when it says they started to deal harshly with them and they made them slaves with all sorts of mortar and brick. I just wonder how long that occurred. Was that 6 months? Was it?
Right, because we
was it a
know
generation?
we know that Joseph died and the new king came into place, the new Pharaoh came into place. But we also know that the Israelites were slaves for some time. So how long did the horribleness of the treatment go on? Okay?
I mean, they were slaves for like 400 years, right?
They were slaves 400 years. But when
They
it
weren't just there
says,
400 years, they were slaves for
Slave.
400 years?
yes,
430 before Moses delivered them.
But yeah, was that the entire time or just?
yeah, so how long were they treated harshly
Right.
and or were they just treated as slaves? And like, so 430 before Moses delivers them. So that's coming up in about 30 years. So here we're at about 400 years. So this whole 400 years, has it been harsh? It sounds like they just now are starting to
Right,
treat them
yeah.
harshly. Yeah,
This one.
yeah.
Because there's time in here for them to, the more they're oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread.
Uh-huh.
And then there's time for the midwives to be blessed and have families of their own. So all this took place over a long period of time.
Yeah, and maybe it was 30 years, because
Yeah.
even in 30 years, you could have all of that going on. But yeah, maybe it was 100. Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah. Anyways.
You say it was longer.
Yeah, because Moses was older when he delivered them than 30.
Sure, yep,
That's-
okay, sure,
Right,
yeah,
right.
yeah,
I don't know what
yeah,
point of the 400 years. when
Right.
Moses
came,
came.
right, exactly,
Yeah.
true, right,
It really
okay.
jumped out at me, sorry for speaking again, but where it said
Don't talk anymore.
said the midwives feared God
Okay,
instead of Pharaoh.
uh-huh,
And so it's like Pharaoh's right here, that's an obvious threat. But they still feared God, who's not as obvious all the time.
yeah. Nice,
Yeah, especially then, because this is before we have like God as pillar of smoke and fire. I mean, so what was there before before we have the temple. Like,
Correct.
how did they know God at all?
Yeah.
Yes,
What was the
after
association
having
there?
lived for potentially centuries in Egypt where they're taught other gods.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that, right.
And interesting too to think about at this point, God had only shown himself as giver, right? Like God hadn't shown any sort of wrath, any sort, like all these people would have known
Right.
is his apparent, his very obvious
Well, he
kindness.
destroyed
Sodom and Gomorrah. Other than that,
Right.
You
nothing.
also have people living for how many hundreds of years?
Mm-hmm.
It's not like
Oh, that's true.
It's not 120. It could be
Right.
985. Like,
Yeah.
where does that over? I mean, I know
Yeah,
this is
exactly.
later in theory, but
Right. That's a good point.
I
Uh-huh.
don't know where the sin crunch had pushed life down. Like,
Mm-hmm. Right.
Are some of these people 300? Are some of the midwives 300 years old at this point that feel God?
Right. Right.
I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah. What did they actually see? Yeah.
I'm kind of interested a little bit earlier in this, like in one of the first, like 8 to 10, somewhere in there, when they were talking about the Egyptians, basically imagining the evils of the Israelites and like basing their harsh treatment of them on something that wasn't even happening. It was just like their hypothetical
Fear.
grievances
Fear.
against them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's something we do also. Just
Yeah.
make up stuff in our mind and then try and do everything.
Right.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Try to plan ahead and keep it from happening. Yeah. What else?
Doesn't Egypt represent the world and Israel represent the church? So the world, it tries to enslave the church and they're scared to death of them at the same time.
Say that last bit again.
So Egypt is the world, Israel is the church, and later in the passage it says that how did it go? Egypt was afraid, or they just despised Israel.
Yeah, dreaded.
They
Yeah.
dreaded the church. Or I don't know. I guess I'm projecting that into New Covenant, but. And yet the world still tries to enslave God's people. With
Yeah.
systems or ways.
Or at least hold them back.
Or hold them back.
Yeah.
Resistance at a
Yeah.
minimum. And yet they dread the church at the same time.
It's
Maybe
good.
that's what we should tell people with gospeling. You dread me.
Sure, that'll turn.
That'll create a soft heart.
That's one of the fire things.
Yes,
A little
yes,
fear in there, the fear gospel.
yes.
I think there's also something with like knowing your history, if that's the way to say it, because at the beginning of this talking about the new king that didn't realize what the Israelites had done for the past generations. Joseph basically saving not just Egypt, but like the entire area at that time from the famine. If it wasn't for them, probably Egypt wouldn't even been around, or at least they would have been in a lot worse shape. So
For sure, if Joseph hadn't.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So this is like the Israelites, or specifically Joseph, got them to a place of great wealth and prosperity, and then they just completely forgot all that. Like, do they have any system of like passing down information? Or
Right.
Isn't that what the fear of the Lord was? Back to Kenzie's question, wasn't that what the fear of the Lord was passed down? Remember when?
Remembrance. Yeah.
Whatever. All the patriarchs and matriarchs.
Right.
And how God delivered them from this and this and this.
Yeah, it speaks to the value and the importance of remembering what God has done, who He is, who He's been for us, etc. Yeah. What else?
Were the Egyptian women really softer than the Hebrew women? Or was that just the spin to the Pharaoh?
Right.
Were they
Yeah.
really weaker? Were they
Uh-huh.
was that just the spin?
Yeah.
It's totally the spin, wasn't I mean,
I
they
think
may have been
so.
stronger, but it's
They
totally.
probably were more pampered though.
Yeah,
That led easier lives than the Hebrew
yeah,
women.
yeah.
I don't know.
Kiddos, anything for you guys?
No.
Nothing?
I'm trying to be attention. He's just.
There's distraction.
It's out.
Okay. Sadie, anything? Whoa. Hips are bigger than I thought. Anything else?
Did the Hebrew kids have to make bricks and stuff?
Yeah, how old?
Oh
were
yeah.
I'm sure.
they? Yeah.
Probably.
I mean,
Allows it until they were forced.
I'm
to.
sure. Yeah. From the time they were old enough to, probably.
Which was probably pretty young.
Okay, cool. I like it. 3 of your things are things that I wanted to talk about.
Can I just ask
Yes.
one more question? On when it said they were oppressed and so they multiplied, I'm just trying to get the connection. Or is there a connection, or what? How does that fit together?
I know, yeah.
Getting beaten and becoming slaves. That make you
Like, were
That
they
struck me
oppressed or, like,
too.
woke oppressed?
That's it.
Let's talk about it. Am I a victim, or just like this is actual slavery?
Right.
See, I think it was their way of giving the Egyptians the middle finger and saying, we're gonna grow anyway.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
That's how
It
I
is
feel.
interesting.
No, it is.
This is a little, maybe a lot for kids, but it does, I do find it interesting. They're working as slaves, they're being driven hard,
Yeah.
and yet they're reproducing. Like, that's an interesting
You got to get some fun somewhere.
something.
Yeah, exactly. I just said, I've worked in the heat before.
I'm just saying.
Today, though, lower income countries have higher birth rates.
That's true. And that's why we see that.
But they're not being abused and beaten and,
Some are.
Well, you think there's some pretty rough.
sure, but I'm saying
countries
that's a
that have
hard
lot-
correlation for me to make.
I mean,
Just to say they're low income and they're making more
It's theoretically
babies.
a different situation, but if you were to look at like what group of people live in a situation most similar to where the Israelites were living, it's going to be low-income countries, Africa, the Middle East, Asia,
And they do have
where they have really high birth rates.
They do.
It's interesting. Yeah. We could do a whole psychology study on that for sure, because that could lead to a lot of ideas and intriguing thoughts. Okay, so you brought up 3 things that were things I was going to talk about. So I'm going to touch on those real quick because we've already slightly touched on them, and then we're going to go back. Nope, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to go through it because otherwise, you know, my brain, bing, 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 bing. So we don't need that. So I'm going to try to ask Jeremy, who has to put up with where are we going in the song next, because who knows? Okay, so one of the things that a lot of the things that I have listened to, one thing I wanted to say in regards to Egypt representing the world and Israel representing the church, one of the things Dennis Prager talks about, no, sorry, it's not Dennis Prager, it's Marty Solomon talks about a fair bit, is God's biggest thing was not getting the people out of Egypt. It was getting Egypt out of the people. And it's true for us today. When we consider that Egypt represents the world, I think God's biggest challenge in his working with us is getting Egypt, getting the world out of us, not getting us out of the world. Like, we've been redeemed, we've been bought, we've become believers, right? But getting that worldliness, that distraction, the confusion, the fear, all those things that are world things, getting that out of us
Getting
is
in the right mind.
getting in the right, in the mindset of how does God work? How does his kingdom work? And us trying to understand that and have that be clear for us. So that's one of the things he said several times that I think is just an interesting point. So when we talk about the 2 most important events in history, what would you say they are?
Wow. Creation?
Yeah. Right.
After creation, let's clarify. After creation,
The Word becoming flesh.
okay.
Jesus' birth.
which is the same. The Word becoming flesh.
The flood, yeah.
The flood.
Jesus' resurrection.
Uh-huh.
It's interesting. Interesting to try to narrow it down. Now, this is coming from a man who, what I read is coming from a man who I don't know where he stands as far as, I don't know. He is Hebrew, Jewish. I don't know if he believes in Jesus. He's very strong on the Torah. But his viewpoint is, what if, okay, let's do it this way. What if you were going to pick the two most important events in history in the Torah? In the first 5 books of the Bible.
That's okay.
The Exodus.
The Exodus and the flood.
The Exodus and the flood.
The giving of the law. The entering the promised land.
I'd have to go with, I don't know how you call this, but like choosing Abraham. God choosing
Choosing Abraham. Okay.
There are like a million of them in the Bible.
Yeah, there are so many. His viewpoint is the two most important historical events in the Torah are the Exodus and the giving of the 10 Commandments. And he says on the Torah hangs everything in those two events because those two events represent liberty and morality. And that is, for him, what he sees as the most important is that we understand today freedom and morality. So it was an interesting thing to consider, like, what are the two most important events in the Torah? And then the bigger picture of history, right? It's just an interesting thing to consider. And then this is the Exodus. We see God's third attempt to create a holy nation, right? His first was what? Very beginning. What was his first attempt to create a holy nation? Adam and Eve. Second attempt, we've talked.
The flood.
The flood. So who did he try to create a whole new nation with?
Abraham.
Family.
Noah.
Wouldn't it be Abraham before?
Abraham came after Noah.
Oh yeah, that's after.
Yeah.
Sorry, I got mine.
So, yep.
Yeah.
So we have Adam and Eve, and then we have Noah, and then the Exodus. He's looking at creating a whole nation. So it's an interesting study. We go from one man to Noah and his family to the whole nation of Israel. And the Exodus is about creating the whole nation of Israel. The Exodus is about freeing this whole nation as a people group who will serve him. So he's trying, again, this is third attempt, right? So here we see the land is overflowing with Jews, and Pharaoh is very uncomfortable. One of the things that I thought was very interesting that you all said, TJ said, the Egyptians were fearful of the Jews. Why is this? They're their slaves.
And yet they were prospering, they were advancing.
They were advancing, growing. In the midst of their slavery, they were advancing and growing and prospering. Pharaoh had reason to be concerned. There's speculation that he also somehow, Pharaoh had been told of or know about the coming Savior from the Jewish nation, from the Israelites. So there's also that, which who knows, but this idea of Pharaoh being so uncomfortable that he is going to be overtaken, that his slaves are going to free themselves. Sorry, not the Savior, that somebody from the Jewish people are going to free the Jewish nation.
Okay.
So it's an interesting thing to consider. He's concerned about these people taking over, siding with the enemies, taking over his nation. Yeah.
Wouldn't that mean that there's so much blessing, like operative and evidence of it, that it scared them?
Yeah.
Like they saw it and they're like, man, we're working,
Something's
we're trying to
going
figure
on.
all this out, and they're falling backwards into it.
Which would
Yeah.
make sense because you think about the Egyptian was it the Egyptian midwives or women that feared God more than Pharaoh? It had to have been because they were seeing evidence of
blessing.
God.
Yeah.
That was commented on earlier, but that would speak to that obviously God's evidence was showing up in the Hebrew nation,
Right.
in Egypt somehow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Power,
somehow.
prosperity, some kind of
Seemed
growth,
evident,
spreading,
which
right?
Pharaoh would
They're
have
growing and.
confronted with too. In some
Yeah.
way.
So I think Pharaoh's fear was hypothetical. I think he made it up in his head, but I also think there was some evidence. It's interesting to me, though, that you're that concerned about this people group that you all of a sudden decide we're going to just treat them horribly, make them horrible slaves, and we're going to kill their babies because I'm so fearful of them overwhelming me and taking everything I have. Listen to this. This is, again, from Dennis Prager, and I found this so interesting. I'm going to read it. It won't take me long, but it is a little bit. The words, "the land was filled with them," this is off of verse 7, imply that although the Israelites were granted permission to live in an area of Egypt known as Goshen, the Egyptians perceived them as everywhere. Throughout history, Jew haters and even many non-Jews sympathetic to Jews have often wildly overstated the number of Jews in their country. I remember once in my early years of lecturing sitting next to a non-Jewish woman on an airplane on the way to Louisville, Kentucky. She asked me why I was visiting her city. I told her I was going to speak to the Jewish community there. As the conversation continued on the subject of Jews, it became apparent to me that this woman thought there were far more Jews in Kentucky than there actually were. I told her at that time there were 280 million Americans, and then I asked her, "How many of them do you think are Jews?" She thought for a moment and responded, "About 50 million. When I told her there were about 6 million out of 280 million Americans, there are 6 million Jews in America, she was clearly startled. She pondered this and then said, "I guess they must all live in Kentucky." As of this writing, there are about 14 million Jews in a world population of about 7.5 billion.
Wow.
That means that about 0.0018% or fewer than 2 out of every 1,000 people in the world are Jews. But few people would guess this because the influence of the Jews has always been so great. And the reason for that influence is this Torah, its God, its 10 Commandments, and its Exodus story. In short, the stories and value of this book of Exodus have transformed the world. So interesting to me. You think of that, 2 out of every 1,000 people in the world are Jewish. I would have thought way more than that. And his whole point is it's because of the influence of the Jewish nation, which the influence of the Jewish nation is because this God, this Torah, the commandments, and the Exodus. Fascinating. So, interesting to note, Pharaoh's fears, while probably way bigger in his head than they needed to be, he was seeing something going on. So, Pharaoh wants to kill them off. And this is interesting as well to me because if we kill all the boys, will that not affect our slave population?
Yeah.
They always kill the males.
Secondarily, let me ask you this. What body actually creates babies? Female bodies create babies, right? Basic science. Male bodies need to participate, but they are not the ones that create the babies.
Right.
My mic is being weird. Female bodies are the ones that create the babies. So if you wanted to kill off a nation,
Right.
wouldn't you kill the girls? Also, that way you keep your strong men. Yes.
Can I share something?
Yes.
Okay, so, in the beginning, what's the first commandment that God gives?
Be fruitful and multiply.
Be fruitful and multiply. When the enemy comes in, one of the first prophecies, what is it? he shall bruise
your heel.
and crush your head. So the enemy's always been after the seed from the beginning. So Moses comes on the scene. They're killing all the babies because of Pharaoh's afraid and all that, right?
Yeah.
God sends a deliverer, in Moses. They're killing all the babies during Herod's time. God sends Jesus. What's been happening the last 70 years or so in America, especially?
Abortion.
Killing all the babies. God shows up. We're like right here where God shows up. Just a thought. Just a little.
Yeah.
I don't know. Sorry, that was. I felt like that tied into that, but it was something I was thinking about. So.
Yeah.
Anyways.
So interesting.
Now, I've heard it said that the reason they kill the males is because of that prophecy.
Because of the
they
seed.
Were actually correct. They're actually trying to kill the coming king.
Right.
And thinking now was the time he
Or the
was coming.
deliverer in this
Or the
case.
deliverer
Yeah.
in this case was Moses.
Huh.
Yeah.
Knowing that prophecy,
Right.
it, like spiritually, however,
Yeah.
worked
Yeah.
itself out.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
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 That's right. And they just didn't get him.
Right. They just didn't get him.
Yeah.
Right. But if they'd been killing the females, not even the baby girls, if they'd been just killing the females, they would have gotten him.
Yeah.
Satan always overplays his hand. That's the reality. Satan is stupid, and so he always overplays his hand. He thinks he's got the victory, he's got this great idea. He's an idiot. Just as good, and God is as big and strong and powerful and all-knowing and loving and kind and compassionate, brave, courageous, all the things as God is. Satan is the opposite. Stupid little worm, moron, idiot, right? All the things, right? So, okay. So he says, let us deal shrewdly with them, our enemies, or they'll join our enemies, fight against us. So Pharaoh actually had garrison cities built, Pithom and Ramses. This didn't help. The Jews continued to increase and spread out. Now the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites. The Egyptians oppressed the Israelites even more. So what you need for evil to be carried out. Let's think about this. What do you need for evil to be carried out? Because this is what Pharaoh is wanting to do. He's wanting to carry out an evil act. One, you need ordinary people who have allowed themselves to be indoctrinated by the truly evil. This, today, ordinary people who have allowed themselves to be indoctrinated by the truly evil. Secondly, you need people who benefit from the evil. Example, World War II. They benefited, the people who were anti-Jew and were killing all the Jews benefited greatly from their actions because they made lots of money, right? Number 3, you need a paucity of courageous good people. That's little amount. Paucity, P-A-U-C-I-T-Y, I learned a new word, is a littleness in numbers or quantity. You need a paucity of courageous good people. So if you only have a few courageous people, you can carry out evil. This is one of the reasons right now I am so incredibly grateful for Christians across the nation and across the world, because even though the world, Egypt, wants to make us think that we are not many, there are many of us. And fortunately, many of us are still believers, courageous, strong, willing to stand up for something right. Prager says, courage is the rarest of all good traits. So I wanted to read again just a little bit out of here. It says, when verse 11 says, so they set taskmasters over them to oppress them with forced labor. It says, the Torah indicts the Egyptians 4 times in the next 4 verses. The Egyptians set taskmasters over the Israelites. They ruthlessly impose hardships on them. They make them perform harsh labors. They make life bitter for them. So the Torah is emphasizing the collective guilt of the Egyptians. Now, we're not just talking about Pharaoh. Now it's the collective guilt. Even though it is Pharaoh who initiates the slavery and annihilation campaign, the Egyptian people are the ones who execute it. Individuals initiate mass evil, but they need the collaboration of many people to carry it out. This explains the collective national punishments the Egyptian people will experience. And you think about this when it comes to everything about Nazis and World War II. It was Hitler, but he could not have done it himself. He had many, many people who would benefit from the evil, who were willing to be indoctrinated by the evil, who were willing to do the evil deeds that they did. Hitler could not have done it on his own, but he was a master. I use this word lightly. He was a master leader. Like, I have often looked at Hitler and thought, what the crap did this guy do that he could lead that many people to do that much evil? It is fascinating to me. And understand, like, I want to learn what he did so that I can do that, not to manipulate, not for evil, but for good. Because that man, as evil as he was, he somehow found a way to lead people in his evilness. And it's very much what is happening here with the Egyptians. Pharaoh figured out how to lead many people and convince those people to carry out the evil that he needed carried out, right? So now let's talk about the midwives and the job of the midwives. There's actually not clarity on, were these midwives Hebrew or were they Egyptian? It's not clear. Scripture often says the Hebrew midwives, but it could also be read the midwives of the Hebrew people, or the midwives to the Hebrew people. So there's a lot of discussion about if they were Hebrew or if they were Egyptian. I was looking up trying to see, is Shifra and Puah, are they Egyptian names? And there is potential that they are Egyptian names, but there is also a version of Hebrew names. So if anybody wants to study way into that, it would be super interesting. I find that fascinating because that would change, to me, that changes the story a little bit. If you're an Egyptian midwife fearing God more than Pharaoh, or if you're a Hebrew midwife fearing God more than Pharaoh. There are many people, several clues that say they were Egyptian women who were the midwives. Why would Pharaoh choose Hebrew midwives to kill Hebrew babies? Plus, there are other clues. So this I found fascinating. You understand, we to this day don't know. We have speculation on who Pharaoh was, the name of Pharaoh who did all of these evils. But in the Torah, in Scripture, nowhere is Pharaoh named. Interesting. Who was named? Shifra and Puah. These ladies were the heroes because they feared God more than Pharaoh. And they are named and they are known to this day, especially in the Hebrew world. They were so important in God's eyes, in God's book, that he names them. And Pharaoh has no name whatsoever other than Pharaoh, other than the king. So another just little fascinating tidbit. So typically we're told and remember villains' names. Here we are told heroes' names. They let the boys live because they feared God over Pharaoh. And so here I wanted to, again, read this. I just love the way he words certain things. Fearing the midwives, fearing God, did not do as the king of Egypt had told them. They let the boys live. There's another important moral aspect to the fear of God. People fear those who are more powerful than they. Therefore, the only way not to fear powerful people is to fear God. Thus, in the instance recorded here, those who feared God saved Hebrew babies, while those who feared Pharaoh helped drown Hebrew babies. Yikes. These are the things that, I'm saying this, these are the things that people will do when they have no fear of God. When there is no fear of God, evil prevails. When we have fear of God, we are willing to stand up for what is right. Courage, character. It was the midwives' fear of God that liberated them from fear of the Egyptian tyrant. This point is often overlooked. Fear of God is a liberating emotion, freeing one from a disabling fear of evil, powerful people. This needs to be emphasized because many people see fear of God as onerous rather than liberating. If one fears no one except God, one can muster the courage not to fear a totalitarian state. And I do believe that the place that we find ourselves in these days, it is vitally important that we learn to fear God above man. I don't know, I'm not saying it's the end of the times, the end of the world, because a lot of people are saying that. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. I'm not going to speculate on that. But what I am saying is that if we are to stay living holy lives, living sold out to the Father, trusting Him above everything else, there has to be a fear of God over a fear of man. I would not be surprised if there is a day coming when it is a crime to serve God, when it is a crime to follow God in the U.S. That would not surprise me. I watch all kinds of shows now that I see coming out, specials on churches that are cults. I love cult shows, so I watch a lot of them. I watch these cult shows, and like, I'm not kidding you, it has changed. If you go look and listen to the shows now that are about cults, a lot of them are Christian churches, Christian organizations, and they're calling them cults. And I'm like, this is the beginning of turning society against Christians, in my viewpoint. I'm sorry, that's super harsh, it's super negative, it's super weighty. But to me, it's important to understand, if I don't have the fear of God, I will cave to the fear of man. And there has to be an understanding that God is bigger and better and stronger and braver, more righteous, more loving, more compassionate than any totalitarian state, than any government, than anything I will face. So it is prime importance that I fear God over fearing man. Okay, so
Sandra, I think courage is an interesting thing to note in light of what you're just saying here, that courage is lacking at times, because courage always comes at a cost, and often grave cost. So in order to take that on, you have to have something bigger than that cost, which ultimately what I'm hearing you saying is trusting, loving, and living in the fullness of who God is, trusting Him beyond men, trusting Him beyond government, etc. That trust will drive you to be courageous.
Yes.
Right? And to accept the cost.
Yes.
That is likely. Because they're almost courageous acts always have at least a very legitimate risk of significant cost.
Yeah.
I mean, you think about the people that started, you know, the United States. They literally were risking being tried as treasonists.
Yeah.
You know, for treason.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
because that's what they were doing. They were committing treason.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And I think too within that, like, understanding that if I'm going to be courageous, that requires trust. So right now, while I have my freedom, while I'm given all the things that I'm given, is a great way and time to build my trust and to build my courage. Yeah, that's good. So then there's this idea of these midwives. The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, they are vigorous. Before the midwife can come to them, they have given birth. Prager's topic on this verse is when lying is moral. And I really like it because what he's talking about is understanding that there are times and seasons in which standing up for what's right and true, it's hard for me to say it because we're in church, may require lying. Like that is a thing. So it's an interesting, I'm not saying we just lie willy-nilly, whatever, but there's a whole essay on this. If you want to come up and read it, I would invite you to do so. I just beside that wrote,
Be wise as serpents and innocent as doves, though.
Mm-hmm.
He does not play into that
Yeah.
a little bit.
Yeah. And then he goes into this idea of situational ethics versus moral relativism. So he's touching on big topics in here. And he says situational ethics is not at all the same as moral relativism. Situational ethics does not mean every individual determines what is moral. It means only by knowing the situation can we know whether an act is moral or immoral. And then he goes on to say this should be clear to anyone who gives it a moment's thought. Take, for example, killing a person. Is that morally wrong? It depends entirely on the situation. If it is done in self-defense or to defend other innocents or in a moral war, it is a moral act. Otherwise, it is not killing, but murder. And murder, by definition, is immoral killing. So there's so much. Again, this is part of why I like this, because it makes me really like think about what's going on in the stories, right? So it says God dealt well with the midwives. So Pharaoh leans to an overall command and edict. So we saw that he said already that he commanded the Egyptians to kill. But then in verse 22 it says, then Pharaoh charged all his people, saying, every boy that is born you shall throw into the Nile. So now it's that collective guilt. Again, we've gone from the single individual command, hey, you midwives, kill the baby boys. Now we've gone to just this edict that covers the whole area. No, if a baby boy is born to the Hebrews, you throw it in the river.
Did he do that because the midwives weren't acting?
Because they were fearing God instead of him. So he just creates this whole overall edict. So he now expects all the Egyptians to help him with his wickedness. So, So that's the totality of the story of baby Moses, which was way heavier and way deeper than Jochebed, mother of Moses, building a place for Moses and sending him down the river. We were talking earlier about what do we see in the story of baby Moses, and just the idea of, did Jochebed, Moses' mother, did she know where the princess bathed? Did she know what time of day? You know, in our day and time, you could send somebody down the river and they might not be found for a while. Send them down the river. You could, like in that time and day, like everybody was going to the river to get their water, to bathe, to do laundry, right? Yeah. So she knew that Moses would be found and seen. So again, so many things that we could talk about just about Moses and being found and then all the rest of it. But we're going to get to that. But I wanted to talk about the evilness and the wickedness of Pharaoh and understand what evil does, how it looks, and the value of courage and fearing God over fearing man, as Shiphrah and Puah did, rather than what the Egyptians were told to do and what many of them did. We don't know how many baby boys were killed. I wish we did. I'd be curious to know that, but we don't know.
Shiphrah means fair or brightness, and Puah means splendid or glitter.
Bright and glittery. Do we know, do you see what, if it gives where it comes from?
Just, I mean, in Hebrew words, but not.
Yeah.
I don't know my Hebrew letters like to that level.
Right.
I'm not there yet.
So for baby boys who are being thrown who are being put in the Nile, that were people other than Moses, were more baby boys than we thought. If we're boys being picked up in the Nile, since so many people were there before. Moses.
That's interesting.
Other than Moses. Yeah,
That's an interesting.
How many boys were picked up?
Yeah.
There were more than we thought.
Yeah. The problem, I think, is like Moses was in a basket, so depending, you know, how they were thrown in.
Right.
There was a little video I was going to show, but it was for kids, and I was like, no, like it was so bad. I was like, I am not. It was terrible, but it made it really real, like of what was going on.
Yeah.
And I was,
Does Prager say anything about the birthing stool?
No. What verse is that?
Enjoy Google on that one.
Right.
You looked it up?
Yeah, it's basically like a chair with a cutout for space for the baby to come out.
Okay.
So, makes sense.
Totally makes sense.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Birthing stool.
Right.
There's actually a lot of people who prefer to sit/squat over laying down.
It's working with gravity, so theoretically easier.
Yeah. Theoretically. Yeah. I think back to those days and I cannot imagine squatting. I'm just like, I just need to lay down. That's it. Just let me lay down. Okay.
Sidetrack us, but it's just a fascinating thought to think that, you know, you throw out names like the Pharaoh during this time, where you were throwing out the name of Hitler, and to think that God's love for them is the same as for Moses or you or I. And to think that, you know, Pharaoh just had the happenstance that he was born into culture, into privilege, into all this stuff that took him to that spot. That was not like Hitler, in that probably not that evil, but definitely had its elements. But he was simply acting on what he knew. And I'm just thinking through how does God navigate all of that?
Yeah.
Because he loved Pharaoh as much as he did Moses. But Moses was his man of the hour and needful for godly things to happen. Pharaoh was not equipped to do that.
Yeah.
Isn't that just governed by the heart and believing or not believing truth, though? Even back then?
Well, it is, but I'm also thinking about the fact that, you know, we all sit here, we were born
post-Christ.
Well, yes, but we were also born as Americans.
Sure.
So we know and experience and do life from that vantage point.
Yeah.
Where Pharaoh was not born as a Hebrew.
Yeah.
If he had been born, that's not possible for that to happen. But let's say he had been born as
in a Hebrew nation or something.
He would have been a very different person, right?
That is one of the things that I didn't say.
Yeah.
And in royal lineage.
That's his culture.
Yeah. And so you act according to that.
Yeah, that's one of the things that TJ said, the remembrance, the history of knowing, you know, it says after Joseph has died and Pharaoh didn't know him.
Yeah.
Pharaoh didn't know Joseph. Didn't, know what
culture,
what Joseph
story.
had done, what Joseph created for the Egyptians. What a blessing and gift he was to his own nation,
Sure,
but
that
he
had
didn't
been
know
lost by that time,
because
sure.
and we're actually going to get to that, but you think about Pharaoh in this state, and you think evil, wicked, terrible, and he was operating out of fear. But down the road, we're going to see Pharaoh's opportunity to see God.
Yeah.
And to change his mind and to change his heart and what happens then.
Yeah.
So we'll get
Pharaoh
there.
type of Satan too, so that I don't know how to explain it. That ambiguity of not having a specific name of who was he. Like.
Interesting. Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
And if Pharaoh did know what it was like to grow up as a Hebrew, would his actions have been different? If he had known Joseph more, would his actions have been different?
Yeah.
Would this whole story have been
totally different? Yeah.
So was he the next right after Joseph, or he's just after Joseph?
Don't know.
We don't know.
Don't know.
Because that's when you like, how would you not?
400 years, and you don't know. They don't say like when Joseph died and when the new Pharaoh came in. I don't know if it was every 4 years.
Sure it was.
Someone doing the same thing?
Listen, since we brought up every 4 years, I don't care who you are, for the love of God himself, literally, vote.
Yeah, please.
I vote. That's it. And I will go off on other things, but I'm not going to. Vote. Get your butt out and register
Have the courage
and
to do it.
vote.
Yeah.
Yes. And much more than just vote, if you can, or if it's a desire. We need godly leaders. We need godly people. So much. It's been my prayer for years. So, okay. So we are going to talk more about that, though, Pharaoh's reaction and God's, one of the things that God often does in the Old Testament is he's interested in saving those who are righteous and ridding the earth of evil. Not because he doesn't love the people, but he knows and needs the earth to have righteousness and goodness in it. And, he is constantly reworking things and shifting and adjusting things to make goodness the primary part of the world of our lives. And so, we had, for example, I have time to share this story. I won't give any names, it was years ago, but we were taking a mission team out and we were training this team, and this was in the day when we were training for like a week before we took the team out, and it was awesome. But we were training this team, and we had a member on the team who was, we didn't know if she was maybe perhaps on the spectrum, or if perhaps there was mental stuff going on, or if she just didn't care, was completely distracted. But it was obvious that it was going to be a problem on the trip. And so, I spent literally a whole night praying over this situation. And I knew in my heart that we had to say, you cannot come on this trip. Not because I didn't love her. I think the trip would have been phenomenal for her. I think it would have impacted her significantly. But we had to say, you can't come for the good of the rest of the team. And I think that was a godly decision, and I think that's the way often God works, is for the good of the numbers, more people, sometimes somebody else gets taken out, has to suffer, whatever. And particularly when they're not soft enough to change their heart or change their attitude. And that was even the case in this situation. There was no repentance. There was no, I'll change, I'll whatever.
None of that. And I just think that sometimes that's the way it works for God on the moral code of things. So let's talk briefly, we still have a little bit of time, talk briefly about the character of God in this story, where we see Jesus in this story. And I have added this, since we're now in Exodus, I've added this question. What can you gather for your own identity out of this story? Okay, so let's start with the character of God.
I think he's faithful to his promises, because he promised Abraham that he was going to make him into a great nation and like multiply him and make him like the sands of the sea or whatever, and have all these kids. And so even though the Egyptians are trying to go against that, they're still having tons of kids.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I like that. Remembering God's promises and then seeing God fulfill his promises. Like he had to protect his people in this situation in order to be faithful to his promise. That was a requirement. What else?
God always promises deliverance out of the world.
Yeah, and that is significant in his character. He always promises deliverance. That is a big statement, and there would be people who would argue that, and I would argue right back. Mm-hmm. I like it. That's a really good point. He always promises deliverance. What else? Faithful to his promises, promises deliverance. That's really good news for us right now. What else? I just think you see the heart of God. You see love, right? He's faithful to his promises because he loves us. He promises deliverance because he loves us.
And not just to the good guys.
Yeah.
We saw him honoring the midwives, which probably were not all Hebrew, some were Egyptian.
Yeah.
We see him really trying to get Pharaoh, come on, work with me here, you know.
Yeah. Kind.
Yeah.
Again, we see the kindness of God, because in this day and in this time frame, the story is in, God could have just smite him.
Yeah, smite him, almighty.
Smite me, almighty smiter. That's from a movie.
Bruce standing in front of a truck in the middle of the night on the highway.
Yeah, so kindness, incredible kindness. Okay, where do we see Jesus in the story? Super obvious. What's the first thing that's super obvious?
Well, the baby born is in the mess.
Baby born, the deliverer.
Yeah.
So fun to think about how Moses had no clue what he was born for. And yet, I love that. And I think that about us. Do you have a clue what you were born for?
I don't know if I should even say this, but
Are you going to talk at some point about the fact that here's the deliverer? He was literally brought into Pharaoh's home and raised in privilege.
Yeah.
And I mean, he was of the culture of Pharaoh, not his Hebrew.
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit last week. The fact that he was the perfect man for the job because of the way he was raised. And we will, we will still. But
amazing. To me, that just, you think about, we see Jesus there.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean,
born
with
into the
everything
world with everything he needed.
I think there's something with the midwives in Jesus, as Jesus kind of like an advocate or like standing in a gap.
Yeah.
Oh, that's good.
And Pharaoh kind of like blocking that or just being that person.
It's interesting to me that Pharaoh didn't kill them. Like, why didn't he kill the midwives for not obeying his order? But he didn't. They didn't even get punished. And in fact, they got blessed by God.
Doesn't that speak to the
value?
Yeah. Oh, sorry. I would just say that God was still involved.
Yeah.
He didn't just throw them out there on their own.
Which
gives me courage to go, I can have the fear of God instead of the fear of man, knowing God's on my side. Yeah.
Doesn't that speak to God's character of, if they have the fear of God, then they're relating to God, and in the same way the midwives have a relationship with Pharaoh on some level, and that a very personal situation as a midwife with those giving birth. Yeah. There's a very connected relationships.
Which is very Jesus connected. Yeah. But it's also representative, again, of Jesus, those midwives, right? They're standing in the gap. They're the in-between. Like, here's Pharaoh saying, do this, and here they are connected to these people, and they're like, no. And that's exactly what Jesus was for us.
An intercessor almost.
Yeah.
The go-between.
Nice. Okay, let's talk about identity. We've got less than a minute. Quick.
What was the question again?
How can you take any identity for yourself out of this story? Like, what can you grab hold of and go, I'm going to make that true for me, for my life? Like, I'm going to add that to my identity.
Fear of God.
Yeah.
Fear of God. What else?
I think courage.
Courage.
You just see so many courageous acts in the story today.
Which is connected to the fear of God, but yeah, like to have the courage. Like, you have the fear of God, then you have to have the courage to actually walk it out.
Yeah.
So I want you to think about, okay, fear of God and courage. How can I make that part of who I am in my life right now, today, tomorrow, next week at work? What does that look like? Is there anything else, other characteristics that you saw in here that you go, I want to be like that?
I think just boldness in the world, in the face of the world, or threats, or whatever, the courage thing. But there's a boldness element to that, of just not giving a rip about
Yeah.
I don't care about your system.
Yeah. Which is, let me just encourage anybody under the age of 40, it gets easier to not care about what people think when you get older. Which I really appreciate.
Perspective. There's more perspective.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, good. Fear of God, courage, boldness. Anything else?
I don't know how to state this, but just, you were kind of mentioning in your different points of the people, with like people, when there's like evil, you have like the good people, but if there's not enough good people, then that's when evil takes over. So there's something about just trying to be one of those good people.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is a little different than just, than just being courageous. Like, deciding ahead of time, I'm going to be one of the good ones, to not be indoctrinated, to not fall prey to the evil, to the lies, to the things that people might say. Cool. Okay. Good. I enjoyed it. Let's pray. Father, thank you for this evening. I thank you for, so thankful for the Torah, so thankful for your word and the things that we can learn and the things that we see. Father, thank you for Jesus. Thank you for having him be our deliverer, for bringing him to the earth, for being our deliverer to be free from sin, that we are no longer slaves to sin, that we should serve sin, that we are not mastered by sin, but and within that, even more, that we have the ability to be free moral agents who choose courage, who choose boldness, who choose to be one of the good and not be easily indoctrinated and blinded by ideas of the world and ideas of Egypt. Father, I thank you for Shifra and Pua, who are examples to us today of what is right and what the fear of God looks like, that we can be courageous, that we can be bold. Father, I thank you so much for your wisdom, that you have given us
the mind of Christ, that you've given us wisdom on the inside to know how to react and how to respond to things, to see what we need to see, and to be able to be those courageous, bold, fearful only of God people and not fearful of men. I thank you for instilling these things within us and helping us walk them out. In Jesus' name, amen. The end. Thank you. We will see you next week.